when a single mom goes online
Everybody at some point needs love in their life.
and meets the man of her dreams.
It's cute.
I know.
Life seems too good to be true.
I didn't know what, but I knew something was gonna go wrong.
Police! Police!
When the things she treasures most become the object of obsession.
Crime check, what are you reporting? Hello, crime check.
This was the first case of this kind that I had ever been involved with.
Her whole world is torn apart.
Mom, he's dying.
For a mom to not know where her kids are is one of the hardest things that I think any mother can go through. I don't know what to do.
When you come and meet up with these people, is there drug activity going on?
No.
Is there money being exchanged?
No.
Any kind of sexual activity going on?
November 2017. Police question a young mother to try and untangle the most elaborate web of lies they've ever seen.
Something peculiar I'd like to ask you about is that this exact same thing with the same people happened in October. So what aren't you telling us?
I'm telling you everything I know.
The extraordinary story they hear is hard to believe, but it turns out to be true.
My name is Lakeisha Johnson. In August 2017, I was 22, living in Kennewick, Washington. I was as happy as can be as a single mother of 3 with my life. Renesmee was 2, Cormia was 1, and Kion was 6 months. They could be brats, but I think that's all children. I want to trade them for the world.
I was mom number 2. We've both shared everything. We both brought him up. We both raised him.
My mom's great. She's my rock.
Lakeisha's past relationships ended badly, but now she's ready to try again.
Everybody at some point needs love in their life.
We can end this.
I felt Lakeisha was craving the boyfriend. She needed to be loved by someone other than her mother.
Lakeisha is a regular social media user and looks for love on a dating app called Meet Me.
I had mixed feelings about posting to Meet Me because most of the men on there just wanted to hook up and have sex. But I actually wanted to be able to talk to somebody and enjoy a conversation. So I was like, I'll do it anyway. See where it gets me. I use social media because I'm a very shy person. It's easier for me to type things or text it than to call somebody on the phone or see them in person. I told my mom about 3.5 weeks after we started talking that I met him.
What's his name?
His name's Kanoa.
It's cute.
I know.
I always knew when she was texting Kanoa. She was always happy. There was always a smile on her face.
He was very sensitive with what he said. It's like he had a woman's mind himself. He understood emotions, and that, to me, was attractive. It was his words I fell in love with. And then it grew into liking more than just his words. One day, Kanoa introduced me to his cousin, Tressa, on Facebook. And she seemed like a real sweet person. She told me that she and Kanoa were like best friends. They talked every day. Three weeks and 2 days after I met Kanoa on Meet Me, he asked me to go to Spokane and meet him in person. I told him that I didn't have a license to drive. So he asked me if, when Teresa went up to Spokane, if I would go with her. We had talked for so long that I was ready to meet him. I wanted to know him and not just the person that I was texting.
Mom? Car, she's here.
Because I got to go meet Kanoa.
Hey, it's so good to finally meet you. Finally in person, right?
And this must be little Kai.
Yes.
Hi, you're so cute.
Teresa was great with the kids. She actually enjoyed having the kids around her.
Aw, hi. It's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from I'll just be a minute.
The plan to meet Kanoa was to have dinner, me, my son, and him, and Teresa was gonna go hang out with her boyfriend.
But when they get to Spokane, Kanoa texts Lakeisha, suggesting a change of plan. Instead of dinner, he wants her to join him for a game of Laser Quest.
I was excited, but there was a problem. And I was like, well, I don't have anybody here to watch Kion. And he mentioned Teresa could watch him.
So, Kanoa tells me that I get to babysit this little cutie here.
Teresa, I don't really feel comfortable leaving Cayenne with you.
And then she turned around and told me, oh, it'll be okay. Go have fun. Your son will be safe with me.
I know, but it's a big responsibility.
I love taking care of kids. I'm Spokane's best babysitter, and we'll only be 10 minutes away at my boyfriend's apartment.
Yeah, you know what, you're right.
Teresa had a kid of her own, and she just seemed like a good person. So I was like, okay.
Hey, I've got to get going. But look, I've got an idea. Take my keys. Wait in the car. You know what? It'll be more romantic anyways if I'm not around when Kanoa gets here.
Are you sure?
This is your moment. Yeah, of course.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, sweetie. Hi. Oh, you must be getting ready for a feed, aren't you?
Have fun with Kanoa. I'm so excited. Oh, and hey, call me or text me anytime if you need to, okay?
Of course.
And I was like, can't wait to meet him. I can't wait to meet him. My stomach was jumping up and down from excitement.
2 hours later, there is no sign of Kanoa.
Well, I sat there. And I had called him. And I texted him. And nobody answered me. And I texted Teresa, and she didn't answer me. So I was like, okay, something's wrong. I was mad at them for not answering me. I was mad at myself for allowing my son to go. Every worst possible thing a mom can think of ran through my mind.
Lakeisha Johnson has driven 140 miles with her baby son to meet the man she fell in love with over the internet. But he hasn't shown up, and her child is missing.
Hello? Mom, I'm in trouble. What's wrong?
When Lakeisha told me she couldn't find Kion, I told her she needed to call the police.
Mom, what if Teresa just fell asleep? I don't want anybody to get in trouble for no reason.
And I was like, they're probably sleeping, not going to the police. I would be overreacting.
You have to do it. You have to call them.
Okay, fine. But first, let me just try one more time.
So I told Teresa that if I don't have my son by the morning time, I was going to call the cops. The next morning, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm calling the cops.
Crime check, what are you reporting? Hello, crime check.
Hello, I need to report my son missing.
Okay, how old is he?
5 months.
He's 5 months old?
Yeah.
Bear with me for 1 second, I'm just letting our dispatchers know, okay?
And as I was talking to them on the phone, Teresa texted me and she told me, hey, I got your son, where are you at?
Lakeisha, are you still there?
Sorry,
Go ahead.
everything's okay now.
Hey, Lakeisha.
Where is my son?
Oh, he's fine.
No, where is he?
He's right here with me. Please, Lakeisha, calm down.
Calm down. I just got off the phone with the police.
The police? Why would you do that? Don't you trust me? You know what? I thought we were friends.
What do you mean? What would you do if your son was missing?
And I said, I texted you guys, I called you. None of you answered me.
Look, after I put Cayenne to bed, I fell asleep and...
What about Kanoa? Why didn't he show up?
I don't know.
Okay, I need to see my son right now. I need to see Cayenne right now, okay?
Okay. I'll be there in a few minutes.
And then I got a text message from Kanoa telling me that he didn't get to see me because he was arrested for speeding. And he went to jail. When I read his text, I felt bad for being mad at Kanoa. Because I do know what happens. I do know people get arrested.
Lakeisha!
When Teresa brought me Kion back, I was so mad. I hated her at that time.
He was so good. And I'm sorry I fell asleep as well. I understand if you're mad.
After that, I was like, I'm ready to go home. I want to go home.
Okay.
I was starting to wonder about Kanoa and Teresa.
Tamara, I'm so sorry about last night.
Don't worry about it, honey. It won't happen again.
I told her you're not going back. And she told me you're right, Mom. But Lakeisha is a very determined woman. And she wanted to meet Kanoa.
I stayed in contact with him because I loved Kanoa a lot. But I still wanted to meet him. I still wanted to know him. Everything about Kanoa attracted me to him. The way he worded things, his looks, everything about him is what any woman could have asked for.
Six weeks after her trip to Spokane, Lakeisha gets a text from another member of Kanoa's family, his mother, Kim.
Mom.
She has terrible news.
Mom! Mom!
What's wrong?
It's Kanoa. He's dying. Mom, he's been in a terrible car accident.
He had smashed his head, and they couldn't get his nose to quit bleeding, and he was passing out. I was scared. I had tried so hard to see him, only to find out that he could possibly die. Teresa told me that her cousin Ivan was going to come pick me up, and I said okay.
What are you doing? Lakeisha?
Mom, I'm gonna go see him with the kids.
Lakeisha, we agreed.
Mom, he's dying.
Okay, you go on your own then.
What don't you understand, Mom? He's dying. I'm taking the kids. He wants to see the kids.
Those kids aren't going anywhere.
Those kids are mine. I think I'm allowed to do whatever I want with them.
I wanted them to meet him and to try and help him. I hoped that him seeing my kids, he would know that, I need to fight.
Fine. You take them. You know I don't like it.
I felt that if Kanoa had died and she didn't get to say goodbye, she would resent me for that. She would blame me. I didn't want that.
A couple of hours later, Teresa's cousin Ivan arrives to take Lakeisha and her children to Spokane.
Everything happened so fast. Almost like we got the text and somebody was there to pick her up.
Hi, are you Ivan?
Yeah, hi there.
Do you mind if I start loading these in?
Yeah, no problem.
I didn't trust Ivan because I didn't know him. I studied him and his vehicle. If something happened, I wanted to be able to at least describe it to the cops. I had a bad feeling something was gonna go wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew something was gonna go wrong.
"23-year-old Lakeisha Johnson and her 3 children are on the way to the hospital, where she's learned her boyfriend is in critical condition.
Do you or the kids want some water?
No, thanks, we're fine.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Ivan used his manners. He smiled. It was easy to drive with him because he made it comfortable.
Hi, guys.
So is he gonna make it?
I don't know. Okay, but listen, the ward is full of doctors up there, and I think maybe you and I should just go first, and then we'll bring the kids later when it's less busy.
You mean leave them in the truck right now?
Yeah, or the doctors aren't gonna let us in.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Ivan seemed like a real sweet guy. He made it very easy to trust him.
I can wait here.
Okay, well, we need to go right now. Look, Kanoa's on the edge. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I knew I had to because it was an emergency.
Okay, fine, but I'm taking my oldest. Okay, let's go.
I was excited because I was finally going to meet Kanoa. That was the only thing that was on my mind.
Kanoa's up on the 3rd floor and Kim's waiting for us up there.
Teresa and I and Renesmee walked in to the hospital. As we get to the elevators, Teresa turns to me and she tells me, you know, I'm getting really tired. I think I'm just gonna sit down here.
Are you sure? I mean,
Honestly,
you don't want to go up and see your cousin?
This whole thing has been so stressful. I mean, it's insane up there. There's so many doctors. Renesmee and I'll just sit down here and we'll wait for you till you're done.
Teresa's explanation was very reasonable. The hospitals are busy. She's tired. I get it. You know, it'd be easier to go upstairs by myself.
Kim's waiting right at the top of the elevator for you, so... I mean, we'll be right here. Let's go sit and wait for Mama.
I'll be 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
I felt, with the cops being involved the last time, it couldn't go wrong again. When I got in the elevator, I watched the doors close. I told myself, okay, they'll be there when I get down. I couldn't believe it. Finally, I would get to see him. I had butterflies.
But before Lakeisha can get to Kanoa, she must find his mother, Kim.
I was worried about meeting Kim because Teresa had told me that she didn't like me for calling the cops. But at the same time, knowing that she asked for me to be there, I felt better about our relationship. I felt like we could actually build one.
Hi, are you Kim?
I couldn't believe it. It's like every time I tried to see Kanoa, something happened. I literally felt like he was right around the corner. It's like I couldn't reach far enough. It's like every corner that I tried to go around, I'd have to go around another one.
With no sign of Kim, Lakeisha heads downstairs to check on her children.
I was expecting to see Renesmee and Teresa downstairs, right where I left them. And when the elevator door opened, neither one of them were there. I walked around the parking lot looking for the truck. But it was gone. For a mom to not know where her kids are. To not know if they're safe. Is one of the hardest things that I think any mother can go through.
Lakeisha Johnson's 3 children have disappeared.
After texting Teresa multiple times and her not answering me, I got the worst thoughts in my head. If I ever get to see him again, are they gonna get sold? Am I gonna find him in a ditch?
Hello?
Mom,
What's wrong?
they're all gone. Teresa's taking them somewhere with Ivan.
Oh, Lord.
I don't know what to do.
I was shattered. This time they got my girls too.
Lakeisha, call the police. Okay, you call them right now.
Okay, bye.
I don't know why I didn't call the police. I guess a part of me just hoped that she would bring them back.
I'll just be a few minutes.
9:30 p.m. Teresa and Ivan pull up at an apartment building in Spokane with Lakeisha's 3 children. Teresa takes Cayenne, the youngest, and disappears.
I tried calling Teresa. She wasn't answering me, so I didn't know what to do. It was at that point I could hear a knock on the door.
Hi, Mom.
And then my mom calls me. And she tells me,
Honey, there's a sheriff here and he wants to talk to you, okay?
Hello, is this Lakeisha Johnson?
yes. I was worried. I was scared. And the only thing that ran through my mind was something happened to my kids.
And you have 2 young girls, 2 and 1.
And I have a son. He's 6 months old.
We found the girls, ma'am. They're safe. They're with Child Protective Services.
Thank God.
The sheriff tells her Ivan is not Teresa's cousin.
Hi, are you Ivan?
He's someone she met online. She persuaded him to drive Lakeisha to the hospital. When he was left stranded with the 2 girls, he called the police.
To know that my oldest 2 were safe, it gave me a little bit of a relief.
What about my son? Where's Cayenne?
We don't know, ma'am. This could be a kidnapping situation. There's an officer on his way to you now. Just sit tight.
And when they told me they didn't know where my son was, I was worried that I would never see him again. It broke my heart to know that I let my kids get taken.
The police take Lakeisha in for questioning and mobilize every available officer in the hunt for her missing son.
Yeah, put out an APB and get everybody down here, all right?
Time is very important in these sort of investigations because the longer the time period that goes on from the initial report, the more time the suspect has to get away with the child or harm the child.
Detective LaManna is joined by Lieutenant McNabb to question Lakeisha.
In the beginning, I thought maybe she could be in on some type of conspiracy because it seemed a little too odd to be true. Why would you leave your kid with the same person who didn't show up with your kid last year?
Because I'm an idiot?
I thought that perhaps she had given the baby to Teresa or even sold her child to Teresa.
Now, when did you first meet Kanoa?
I didn't.
Is she like a boyfriend over the internet? Or?
But then we started to establish that she was most likely the victim herself.
Have you met his mom in person?
No.
Have you spoken to her? Like to hear her voice?
Have you ever met Kanoa? Have you ever met Kim? At this stage, I pretty much joined all the dots together. I don't think anybody has, because they don't exist. I realized that Kim, Teresa, and Kanoa were all the same person. This entire scheme was an elaborate plan to abduct a child.
I had no clue they didn't exist. None at all. If I did, I never would have came over here. I never would have brought my kids here.
It was very hard for me to believe that I allowed myself to be so naive, to trust somebody. I felt like I failed my children. I felt like I failed myself. I hated Teresa. I wanted her to know how it felt. I wanted her to feel empty. I wanted her to feel broken.
Lakeisha gives Teresa's number to the police.
I called the number.
Hi, this is Teresa. Leave me a message.
And left a voicemail saying, "This is the police."
We're looking for Lakeisha's child. Can you please call me back as soon as possible?
I did not expect to get a response, but I really, really wanted a response.
I don't expect...
Kidnapping is right up there with homicide, especially with a child who's vulnerable and can't defend themselves.
Oh, hang on, just a second, I gotta go. Bye.
Yeah.
About an hour later, I got a text back.
Hey, Lamanna, check this out.
The message comes from Teresa's phone, but is from someone new.
The text message I got was from a guy named Clay.
Who's Clay?
I don't know.
How many aliases does this woman have?
My deduction was that Clay was just another fictitious personality that Teresa was portraying, and I wanted her to understand how serious this was.
We are treating this case as a kidnapping. We need to know exactly where you are. Room 36, the motel in Spokane Valley. Go.
My main fear in a situation like this is that the suspect could act rashly and hurt the child in some way.
Open up, this is the police.
Or try to use the child as a shield or as a hostage.
Open up, this is the police.
Okay, get in the car. Go back a few feet. Stay there.
It's a dangerous, intense moment.
Police! 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 Police!
The officers went to the hotel and checked the room number that was given to me by Teresa, and nobody was there.
She's feeding us garbage. Back to work.
Yeah.
The mood in the room was intense. Every minute that goes by, she could get further away from Spokane or panic and hurt the child.
Well, they We're looking for Kion. I had thoughts go through my head that Kion could be being sexually abused.
Yeah.
Then my phone rang, and it was a number I didn't recognize.
This is Lieutenant McNabb.
Hi, this is Teresa.
Teresa, I'm glad you called.
You know, this whole thing has just been a really huge misunderstanding.
Teresa, where are you?
I'm waiting here at the hospital, Sacred Heart.
Okay.
I was purposely trying to keep her on the line as long as possible while we were scrambling officers to the hospital to try and find her.
It was like I just gave birth to him all over again.
When the police question Teresa, they discover her real name is Fern Littlecalf.
Did they tell you what you're being arrested for? Kidnapping. 3 counts of second-degree kidnapping.
3 counts?
3 counts. So stand up for me.
She doesn't reveal why she abducted Kian, but the police have a theory.
I think she had possibly either lost a child or had a child taken from her, and she was looking for any way to get a child to raise as her own.
Littlecalf pleads guilty to second-degree kidnapping and is sentenced to 6 months in jail. Police find no evidence that any of Lakeisha's children were sexually abused.
The call came just before sunrise. Not the kind of call anyone expects after 20 years of silence. Not the kind that reopens graves, rattles old memories, and sends investigators digging through evidence boxes sealed with dust and time. It was short, direct. A voice on the other end said only one thing before hanging up. Check the family. That was all. 3 words. Enough to crack open a case that had haunted a quiet town since the summer of 2001. Back then, the town of Maple Ridge looked like the kind of place where nothing truly bad could happen. Tree-lined streets, porch lights glowing softly at night, neighbors who knew each other's dogs by name. On weekends, the local diner overflowed with farmers, teachers, and teenagers talking about football games and county fairs. Crime reports rarely made the front page. Until July 14th. That morning, 26-year-old Emily Carter vanished without a trace. She wasn't the type of person who disappeared. Everyone said the same thing. Responsible. Organized. The kind of person who left sticky notes on the fridge, reminding herself to buy milk. She worked as a part-time librarian at the small municipal library downtown, a red brick building that smelled faintly of paper and old wood. Emily had plans that day. At 9:30 a.m., she was supposed to meet her sister for breakfast. At 11, she had a shift at the library. That evening, she was scheduled to attend her father's birthday dinner at the family home just outside town. She never showed up to any of it. At first, no one panicked. People in Maple Ridge were used to slow mornings. Maybe Emily overslept. Maybe she decided to run errands first. But when the hours passed and her phone rang unanswered, the tone shifted. By mid-afternoon, concern spread quietly through the Carter family. At 6:18 p.m., Emily's sister called the police. Officers arrived at Emily's small white bungalow just after sunset. Nothing seemed wrong from the outside. The porch light was still on. Her car sat in the driveway, windows closed, curtains drawn exactly as usual. Inside, everything looked normal, almost too normal. Her purse rested on the kitchen counter. Wallet inside, credit cards untouched. Her phone sat plugged into a charger beside the sink. A mug of coffee, half finished, had gone cold on the table. There were no signs of struggle, no broken furniture, no blood, no overturned chairs. The air carried the stillness of a house paused in the middle of an ordinary morning. But one thing was missing: Emily Carter. Police quickly realized they were dealing with something strange. People vanish every year, but rarely like this. No pack bags, no financial activity, no car movement, no digital trace suggesting she left willingly. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment and never returned. By midnight, the investigation had escalated. Patrol cars moved slowly through Maple Ridge streets. Officers knocked on doors. Flashlights swept across yards and wooded trails surrounding the Carter property. The following morning, the headline appeared in the local paper. Young woman missing. Community joins search. Volunteers arrived in waves. Farmers with ATVs. High school students carrying water bottles. Retired neighbors combing through tall grass fields beyond the Carter house. The sheriff's department organized search grids stretching across miles of woodland. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs followed scent trails that ended abruptly near the road behind Emily's house. Then nothing. No footprints leading into the forest. No tire tracks out of place. No witnesses reporting screams, arguments, or suspicious vehicles. The silence around Emily's disappearance was almost unnatural. Days turned into weeks. The case began appearing on regional news broadcasts. Reporters stood outside the Carter home, delivering updates to cameras while the family watched from behind closed curtains. Each interview sounded the same. She would never just leave. She loved her family. This doesn't make sense. Detectives started where they always start, the inner circle. Family, friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends. Emily's life, on the surface, was painfully ordinary. No criminal connections, no known enemies. Her co-workers described her as quiet but friendly, someone who spent lunch breaks reading mystery novels behind the circulation desk. There was only one detail investigators kept circling back to: the argument. 3 nights before Emily vanished, neighbors heard shouting coming from the Carter family home during a birthday gathering. Witnesses couldn't make out the words, but they clearly heard raised voices between Emily and her older brother, Daniel Carter. Daniel told police it was nothing. Just family stuff, he said during questioning. We argue sometimes. That's it. No physical confrontation. No threats. Nothing that suggested violence. Still, detectives noted it carefully. In small towns, people remember arguments, especially when someone disappears days later. Weeks passed without progress. Search teams expanded outward, covering lakes, abandoned barns, drainage ditches, and construction sites. Nothing. No body. No clothing. No trace of Emily Carter anywhere within 50 miles. The case slowly shifted from missing person to something darker. A suspected abduction. But even that theory raised more questions than answers. Whoever took Emily left behind no forced entry. No broken locks. No signs of someone entering the home, which suggested something deeply unsettling. Either Emily opened the door willingly, or the person who took her was someone she trusted. That possibility cast a long shadow over the investigation. Detectives re-interviewed everyone close to her. They looked harder at Daniel, the older brother, 32 years old in 2001, mechanic, lived 20 minutes away in a small rental house. On the morning Emily disappeared, Daniel claimed he was at work by 8 a.m., repairing engines at a local auto shop. His co-workers confirmed it. But one detail bothered investigators. Daniel had arrived late that day, nearly 40 minutes late. When detectives asked why, he shrugged. Traffic. There were no cameras back then. No GPS data. No phone tracking to confirm his movements. Just his word. Still, there wasn't enough to charge him with anything. No evidence connected Daniel to the disappearance. No witnesses placed him near Emily's home that morning. Eventually, the investigation broadened again. Strangers passing through town. Traveling salesmen. Construction workers working on a highway expansion 15 miles away. Every lead faded. Months passed, then years. The Carter family held annual vigils outside the library where Emily worked. Candles flickered in the dark while residents stood quietly, hoping for answers. But Maple Ridge slowly moved on. New families moved into old houses. Children who helped search the woods grew into adults who barely remembered the details. Emily Carter became a photograph pinned to a bulletin board at the sheriff's office. Another unsolved mystery. Another cold case. By 2006, the investigation had officially stalled. Evidence boxes were labeled, sealed, and placed in storage. Detectives who once worked the case retired or transferred. For nearly 2 decades, nothing changed. Until the phone call. The call that came just before sunrise on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Detective Laura Bennett had only been assigned to the department's cold case unit for 6 months when the message appeared on her desk. A typed note summarizing the call received overnight. Anonymous tip. No name, no number. Just the words the dispatcher wrote down while listening. Check the family. At first, Bennett almost dismissed it. Cold case units receive anonymous tips constantly. Most lead nowhere. Rumors, gossip, conspiracy theories. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the simplicity. Or maybe it was the fact that the caller didn't accuse anyone directly. Just 3 words. Check the family. Bennett pulled the Carter case file from storage later that afternoon. The box was heavier than she expected. Inside were thousands of pages. Witness statements, search maps, photographs, interview transcripts, forensic reports. 2 decades of unanswered questions. She sat at her desk, flipping slowly through the material. Emily's smiling photograph stared back from the first page. 26 years old. Brown hair. Freckles across her nose. A face frozen in time, unchanged while the world around it aged. Bennett continued reading. And somewhere around page 400, she noticed something strange. A detail buried deep inside the original investigation. Something no one had followed up on. A witness statement. A neighbor named Walter Hayes who lived 2 houses down from Emily in 2001. His interview transcript was short. Just 1 page. Most detectives probably skimmed it. But one line jumped out. Hayes claimed he saw a car parked outside Emily's house around 6:30 a.m. the morning she vanished. Not unusual by itself. Except for the description. A dark green pickup truck. That detail might have meant nothing, except for one quiet fact hidden elsewhere in the file. Daniel Carter owned a dark green pickup truck in 2001. The connection had been mentioned briefly in early reports, then somehow disappeared from the main investigative timeline. No follow-up. No recorded interview asking Daniel about the truck that morning. Nothing. Detective Bennett leaned back in her chair, staring at the page. For 20 years, the town of Maple Ridge believed Emily Carter vanished into thin air. An unsolvable mystery. A ghost story whispered during late-night conversations. But now the file sitting on Bennett's desk told a different story. A story investigators might have overlooked. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't hidden in the woods or buried in shallow graves. Sometimes they sit quietly inside families, waiting. And 20 years later, someone had finally decided it was time to talk. Detective Laura Bennett didn't believe in coincidences. Not the kind that quietly sit inside a case file for 20 years without anyone noticing. Not the kind that involve a missing woman, a suspicious argument, and a truck that somehow vanished from the timeline of an investigation that had once consumed an entire town. She stared again at the witness statement. Walter Hayes, age 72 at the time of the interview. Retired railroad worker. Lived 2 houses down from Emily Carter. His statement had been recorded on July 18, 2001, 4 days after Emily vanished. 1 page. A single paragraph that should have raised alarms. Instead, it had been filed away like background noise. Hayes told investigators he woke up early every morning. Said he liked to sit on his porch with coffee while the sun came up over the fields behind Maple Ridge. According to his statement, around 6:30 a.m. on July 14th, he noticed a pickup truck parked near Emily's driveway. Dark green, older model, engine running. He remembered because the truck sat there longer than normal, maybe 10 minutes. Then it drove away. Hayes never saw who was inside. At the time, investigators likely treated it as just another passing vehicle. Rural towns see dozens every morning. Farm workers, delivery drivers, commuters heading toward the highway. But Bennett kept reading. And the more she read, the stranger it became. Because Emily Carter's estimated time of disappearance, based on the untouched coffee mug and the last known activity in her home, fell somewhere between 6:15 and 7 a.m., exactly when that truck was sitting outside. Bennett opened another folder. Vehicle records. Daniel Carter. Registered owner. 1996 Ford F-150. Color. dark green. For a moment, the office felt unusually quiet. Cold cases often collapse under their own weight. Leads grow stale. Witnesses forget. Evidence disappears. But sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes a detail ignored for 20 years becomes the thread that unravels everything. Bennett checked the original interrogation notes from Daniel's interview. July 16, 2001, 2 days after Emily vanished. The transcript ran 23 pages. He answered questions calmly. Where were you the morning Emily disappeared? At work. What time did you leave home? About 7:30. Did you see Emily that morning? No. Did you drive by her house? No. The detective conducting the interview never asked about the truck scene at 6:30. Not once. Bennett flipped back through the pages again to make sure. Nothing. No follow-up. No confrontation with a witness statement. It was as if the two pieces of information existed in separate universes. She leaned back, thinking about how investigations sometimes unfold in real time. Detectives juggling dozens of leads, tips pouring in from every direction, pressure from media and family members demanding answers. Mistakes happen. Oversights happen. But 20 years later, the oversight felt enormous. Bennett printed a copy of Hayes' statement and pinned it to the investigation board in the cold case office. Then she pulled Daniel Carter's photograph from the file. 32 years old in 2001. Broad shoulders. Short hair. Expression neutral. The kind of face that revealed very little. She studied it for a long moment. If Daniel Carter had been outside his sister's house at 6:30 that morning, then his original timeline collapsed instantly, which meant one of two things. Either the neighbor was mistaken, or Daniel Carter lied. There was only one way to find out. Walter Hayes was still alive. At 93, he now lived in a small assisted living facility on the edge of town. His memory had faded in places, according to medical records Bennett reviewed before visiting him. But staff said he still recognized old neighbors and could recall events from years ago with surprising clarity. Bennett arrived that afternoon. The facility smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A nurse guided her down a quiet hallway toward a small room where Hayes sat beside a window watching birds gather on a feeder outside. His hair was thin and white now, his hands trembling slightly as he held a cup of tea. When Bennett introduced herself and mentioned Emily Carter's name, his eyes sharpened immediately. "I remember her," he said softly. "Everyone does." Bennett asked about the morning of July 14th. At first, Hayes hesitated, searching through distant memories like someone flipping through old photographs. Then slowly, pieces began returning. "The truck," he said. "You remember it?" He nodded. "Green pickup, parked by her driveway. Did you see who was driving?" Hayes shook his head. "No, sun wasn't fully up yet. Windows were dark." Bennett leaned forward. "How sure are you about the time?" Hayes didn't hesitate. 6:30, maybe a little after. I always watched the news at 6, then took my coffee outside. His voice carried quiet certainty. "Did you tell the police this in 2001? "Yes." "Did anyone ever come back and ask more questions?" Hayes frowned. "No, just the one interview." Bennett asked the question she'd been holding back. "Did you ever see that truck in a neighborhood before?" The old man took a slow breath. "Yes." "Whose was it?" Hayes looked out the window again, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to focus through time. "Her brother's." The answer landed like a stone in still water. Bennett didn't react immediately. Instead, she asked carefully, "You're certain about that?" Hayes nodded. "Daniel drove that truck all the time back then. I'd seen it at their parents' house many times." 20 years earlier, that statement should have changed the direction of the entire investigation. But it hadn't. And now the implications were impossible to ignore. If Daniel Carter's truck was parked outside Emily's house during the window of her disappearance, then his alibi, arriving late to work because of traffic, suddenly looked very different. Bennett thanked Hayes and stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The air carried the quiet stillness of rural Maple Ridge, the same stillness that had existed here 20 years ago when Emily Carter vanished. Somewhere in town, Daniel Carter still lived his life, still went to work, still walked the same streets as people who once searched the woods for his sister. For 2 decades, no one had connected the dots. But now the cold case unit was reopening the investigation officially. That meant new interviews, new warrants, and a closer look at the Carter family. Bennett's next stop was the old evidence storage facility. Dust-covered shelves stretched across the room like silent archives of forgotten tragedies. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly, each labeled with case numbers dating back decades. She found the Carter case evidence near the back. 3 sealed containers. Inside were items collected from Emily's house in 2001. Clothing, photographs, notebooks, kitchen items, even the coffee mug left on the table the morning she disappeared. Forensics back then had limitations. DNA technology in 2001 was nowhere near what it had become 20 years later, which meant evidence once considered useless might now tell a completely different story. Bennett carefully opened the first box. Inside lay the mug, still preserved inside an evidence bag. The dark stain of dried coffee remained along the rim. She stared at it, imagining Emily sitting at that kitchen table during the final quiet moments before everything changed. Maybe she heard a knock at the door. Maybe she recognized the voice outside. Maybe she opened the door without hesitation. Because it was family. Bennett sealed the box again. Then she opened the second container. This one held photographs taken inside the house. Kitchen, living room, hallway. One photo showed the front door from the inside. Unlocked. No damage. No forced entry. Another detail investigators noted, but couldn't fully explain. If someone forced their way inside, there should have been signs. But there weren't, which left only 2 possibilities. Emily opened the door willingly, or she already knew the person entering. Bennett closed the box slowly. Then she looked at the investigation board back at her office later that night. Photographs, witness statements, timeline notes, and now, pinned in the center, a single image. Daniel Carter. Underneath it, she wrote 3 words in black marker. Seen at 6:30 a.m. For 20 years, the Carter family had lived under the shadow of an unsolved disappearance. Now the investigation was circling back to them. Back to the argument heard by neighbors days before Emily vanished. Back to the brother whose truck sat outside her house that morning. Back to the quiet possibility that the answer had always been there, hidden in plain sight. But reopening a cold case has consequences. Because when detectives start digging through old secrets, they rarely stay buried. And somewhere in Maple Ridge, someone had made that anonymous call. Someone who knew enough about the Carter family to say only 3 words. Check the family, which meant the most dangerous part of the investigation hadn't even begun yet. Because if a family secret truly lay at the center of Emily Carter's disappearance, then the truth had been hiding in Maple Ridge for 20 years. The Carter house still stood at the end of Maple Ridge Road. White siding, long gravel driveway, a row of aging maple trees stretching along the fence line like silent witnesses to 20 years of quiet decay. The house looked smaller than the photographs from the original case file, as if time had slowly pressed it down into the earth. Detective Laura Bennett parked across the street just after noon. The property had once been the center of frantic search efforts, patrol cars lining the road, volunteers gathering in clusters, helicopters passing overhead while Emily Carter's parents stood on the porch answering the same unbearable question again and again. Where is she? Now the house looked ordinary, peaceful even, but Bennett knew better than to trust appearances. Cold cases have a strange gravity. They sit beneath everyday life like buried fault lines, invisible until something finally shifts. She stepped out of the car and looked at the windows. The Carter parents had both passed away years earlier. Heart complications for the father in 2010, cancer for the mother 5 years later. Their deaths closed one door of the investigation forever. 2 people who might have carried memories, suspicions, or truths that never made it into police reports. But the family itself had not disappeared. Emily's sister, Rachel Carter, still lived in town. And Daniel Carter still lived 20 minutes away in the same small rental house where detectives first questioned him in 2001. Bennett decided to start with Rachel Because sometimes the quietest witnesses hold the most important pieces of a story. Rachel Carter worked at a dental clinic downtown. The office smelled faintly of disinfectant and mint when Bennett arrived that afternoon. A receptionist led her through a hallway toward a small break room where Rachel sat alone, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when Bennett entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel Carter was 47 now, but the resemblance to Emily was unmistakable. Same brown hair, same freckles across the nose, same eyes that seemed to hold something permanently unsettled beneath the surface. Bennett introduced herself and gently explained why she was there. The department has reopened Emily's case. Rachel's fingers froze around the phone. For a second, the room felt very still. You mean the cold case unit? She asked quietly. Yes. Rachel leaned back in her chair, absorbing the words slowly. They told us years ago there was nothing left to investigate. Bennett had heard that sentence before from families of missing people. It carried a particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion that comes after years of hope slowly fading into something quieter and heavier. We've received new information, Bennett said. Rachel studied her face carefully. What kind of information? Something connected to the morning Emily disappeared. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the table, tracing the edge of a coffee stain with her fingertip. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years, and suddenly there's something new. Bennett nodded. Yes. Rachel exhaled slowly. Then ask whatever you need to ask. The interview began with familiar ground. Where were you on July 14th, 2001? Rachel explained she had been waiting for Emily at the diner that morning, the breakfast they had planned. When Emily didn't show up, Rachel assumed she overslept. She was always late, Rachel said with a faint smile that quickly faded. How close were you and your sister? Bennett asked. Very. Did she seem worried about anything in the days before she disappeared? Rachel hesitated. The pause lasted just long enough for Bennett to notice. There was the argument, Rachel finally said. With Daniel? Rachel nodded slowly. What was it about? For years, the official story had remained vague, a normal family disagreement during a birthday gathering at the Carter house. But now Rachel's expression suggested something more complicated. They didn't get along sometimes, she said carefully. Why not? Rachel rubbed her hands together as if warming them. Daniel had problems back then. What kind of problems? Money. Drinking. He borrowed from people. Bennett wrote that down. Did Emily know about it? Yes. And Rachel looked toward the window, thinking. She hated it. Said he kept dragging the family into things. What happened during the argument? Rachel's voice dropped. Emily told him she wasn't covering for him anymore. Covering for what? I don't know exactly. Just something he wanted her to lie about. Bennett felt a quiet tension building in the room. Did Daniel threaten her? Rachel shook her head. No, but he was angry. How angry? Rachel took a long breath before answering. Angry enough that my father had to step between them. That detail had never appeared in the original reports. Bennett noted it carefully. What happened after the argument? Daniel left. Did Emily talk about it later? Rachel nodded. She called me the next night. What did she say? Rachel's voice softened as if replaying the memory. She said Daniel was in trouble. Real trouble. What kind of trouble? She didn't explain. Did she sound afraid? Another pause. Yes. The word hung in the air. Afraid. For 20 years, investigators had never established a clear motive behind Emily Carter's disappearance. But fear suggested something deeper than a random encounter. Something personal. Bennett decided to move carefully. Rachel, I need to ask you something directly. Rachel looked up. Okay. Did you ever suspect Daniel might know more about Emily's disappearance than he told investigators? The question seemed to drain the color from Rachel's face. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered something Bennett hadn't expected. I think my mother suspected. The statement shifted the atmosphere instantly. Why? Bennett asked. Rachel swallowed. Because of what happened the night Emily disappeared. Bennett leaned forward. What happened? Rachel closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself. Daniel came back to the house. What time? Late. Around midnight. That detail had never appeared in the case file either. What did he say? He asked if Emily had come home. And my mother told him she was missing. Rachel's voice trembled slightly. He didn't seem surprised. Bennett felt the quiet gravity of the moment settle between them. What do you mean? Rachel stared at the table. It was like he already knew. Outside, traffic moved slowly along Maple Ridge Road. Ordinary sounds drifting through the window, while inside the break room, a 20-year-old mystery began quietly shifting shape. Bennett asked the next question carefully. Did your mother ever say anything about it later? Rachel nodded. Once. What did she say? Rachel hesitated, then finally answered. She said a mother always knows when something is wrong with her children. Bennett waited. And Rachel looked up. She said Daniel looked like someone carrying something heavy. The words landed with quiet weight. For years, the Carter family had stood together publicly during vigils and interviews. They spoke with one voice, asking for help, pleading for answers, insisting Emily would never disappear voluntarily. But beneath that unity, small fractures had existed. Arguments, fear, and perhaps suspicion. Bennett closed her notebook slowly. The investigation was no longer just about a missing woman. It was about the possibility that someone inside the Carter family had been hiding the truth from the very beginning. And now, 20 years later, those old fractures were beginning to open again. Because somewhere in Maple Ridge, someone had made that anonymous call. Someone who believed the secret inside the Carter family was finally ready to surface. But Bennett understood something else now. If Daniel Carter truly had something to do with Emily's disappearance, then the next interview would not be simple. Because confronting a suspect in a 20-year-old cold case means walking into a life built carefully on silence. A life where the past has been buried so deeply that even the people closest to it might not recognize the truth anymore. And in Maple Ridge, that silence had lasted 2 decades. But not much longer. Daniel Carter still drove a pickup truck. Not the same one from 2001. That vehicle had long since disappeared from registration records. Sold sometime in late 2002, according to the DMV archive Bennett had pulled the night before. But the habit remained. Mechanics often keep the same routines for life, and Daniel Carter had spent the last 20 years working with engines. Grease under the fingernails. Early mornings. Long hours in repair bays filled with the metallic smell of oil and hot steel. The garage sat on the outskirts of Maple Ridge, a squat concrete building beside a highway service road. The faded sign above the entrance read Ridgeway Auto Repair, the same place Daniel claimed he had been working the morning Emily vanished. Detective Laura Bennett parked across the street, just before closing time. The afternoon sun reflected off the garage doors while mechanics moved slowly inside, finishing their final jobs of the day. Air compressors hissed. Metal clanged. Radios played quietly in the background. Daniel Carter stepped into view a few minutes later. He was older now, of course. 57, broader through the shoulders than in his old case photograph. His hair had thinned and grayed along the temples, but the face was unmistakable. Calm. Controlled. The kind of expression people develop after years of routine. Bennett watched him for a moment before crossing the street. Some interviews begin with tension immediately. Others unfold slowly, like careful chess moves. This one felt somewhere in between. Daniel noticed her as she approached. Mechanics learn to recognize strangers quickly, especially ones who carry themselves like law enforcement. He wiped his hands with a rag. "Can I help you?" Bennett showed her badge. Daniel Carter? His eyes flicked briefly to the badge, then back to her face. "Yeah, I'm Detective Laura Bennett with the County Cold Case Unit." A subtle shift crossed his expression. Not panic, not surprise exactly, but something closer to recognition. People in small towns remember old investigations. Even decades later. "This about Emily?" he asked. "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured someone might come back eventually." That response caught Bennett slightly off guard. "You did." He shrugged. "Cold cases get reopened all the time now. New DNA stuff. True crime shows. Happens." His tone stayed calm. Too calm, Bennett thought. "Mind if we talk for a few minutes?" she asked. Daniel glanced toward the garage interior where the last mechanic was lowering a car from a lift. Sure, he said. Office is quieter. The office sat behind a glass partition near the front of the building. A small desk, filing cabinets, and a coffee maker humming quietly on a side table. Daniel closed the door behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Bennett sat down across from him. I've been reviewing the original investigation, she said. Daniel nodded again. They asked me everything back then. I know. Bennett opened her notebook. I like to go through some of it again. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Okay. The questions started simple. Where were you living in July of 2001? Same rental house outside town. What was your relationship like with your sister Emily? Normal, he said. Normal how? We got along most of the time. Did you argue? Sometimes. Families do. Bennett flipped a page. Witnesses reported an argument 3 days before Emily disappeared. Daniel shrugged. Yeah. What was it about? Money. Explain. Daniel exhaled slowly. I owed some people. Emily didn't like it. What kind of people? Nothing serious. Just loans. Illegal loans? Daniel hesitated. Not exactly legal either. Bennett noted the answer. Did Emily threaten to report anything to police? No. But she was angry. Yes. The conversation moved gradually closer to the morning of July 14th. What time did you wake up that day? About 6. What time did you leave your house? 7:15. What time did you arrive at work? Around 8:40. Bennett looked up from the notebook. Your shift started at 8. Daniel nodded. I was late. Why? Traffic. It was the same answer from 20 years earlier, delivered in the same steady tone. Bennett let the silence linger before asking the next question. Daniel, do you remember what vehicle you were driving in 2001? Yeah, Ford pickup. What color? Green. The room felt slightly smaller now. Do you remember where that truck was at 6:30 on the morning Emily disappeared? For the first time, Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved briefly toward the window, then back to Bennett. At my house. You're certain? Yes. Bennett slid a copy of Walter Hayes' statement across the desk. The paper stopped in front of him. Daniel glanced down. Didn't touch it. Mr. Hayes lived 2 houses from Emily, Bennett said. He reported seeing a dark green pickup parked outside her driveway around 6:30 that morning. Daniel remained silent. He also told investigators he recognized the truck. Still silence. He says it was yours. Daniel finally picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the statement slowly. When he looked up again, his expression hadn't changed much. Old man must be confused, he said. He seemed very certain when I spoke with him yesterday. Daniel gave a faint smile. He's 93. The answer came quickly, almost rehearsed. Bennett leaned forward. You told detectives in 2001 that you didn't go near Emily's house that morning. That's right. Are you still saying that now? Yes. Bennett watched his face carefully. Your sister Rachel mentioned something interesting. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. What? She said Emily believed you were in serious trouble before she disappeared. Daniel leaned back again. Rachel. Of course. Sisters talk, he said. What kind of trouble were you in? Debt. With who? People who loan money. Dangerous people? Daniel shrugged. Some. Did Emily know about them? Maybe. Did she threaten to expose anything? No. Did she threaten to stop helping you? That question landed harder. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. She already had. Bennett let the words settle. Daniel, did you see Emily the morning she disappeared? No. Did you speak to her? No. Did you go to her house? No. His answers remained steady, but something subtle had changed in the air, a tension that hadn't been there at the start of the interview. Bennett decided to push one step further. Why did you go to your parents' house at midnight that night? Daniel blinked, the first real crack in his composure. Rachel told you that? Yes. He rubbed the back of his neck. I was worried. Why? Emily didn't answer my calls. What time did you start calling her? Late afternoon. After Rachel reported her missing? Yes. Bennett watched him closely. When your mother told you Emily was missing, how did you react? Daniel stared at the desk for a moment. Then he said something that sounded almost mechanical. I was shocked. Bennett remembered Rachel's words from earlier that day. He didn't seem surprised. She decided not to confront that yet. Instead, she asked one final question. Daniel, what happened to your truck? What do you mean? The green pickup. He shrugged. Sold it. When? Year later, maybe. To who? Don't remember. The answer was too casual, too vague. Bennett closed her notebook. That's all for now, she said. Daniel looked relieved, just slightly. You think I had something to do with Emily disappearing? He said. It wasn't a question. Bennett stood up. I think there are questions that were never answered. Daniel nodded slowly. 20 years is a long time. Yes, Bennett said. It is. She left the garage as the sun dipped low behind the highway. Across the parking lot, traffic moved steadily toward town, headlights beginning to flicker on as evening approached. Inside Ridgeway Auto Repair, Daniel Carter stood alone in the office window, watching her drive away. The interview had ended without confession, without confrontation, without proof. But something about it lingered with Bennett as she drove back toward the sheriff's office. Because people who lie during investigations usually do one of two things. They panic, or they overprepare. Daniel Carter hadn't panicked, which meant one possibility remained. He had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. And somewhere between that old green pickup truck, the argument before Emily disappeared, and the quiet visit to his parents' house at midnight, a piece of the truth was still missing. But cold cases have a way of pulling those pieces together slowly. And now the Carter family secret, whatever it was, had begun to move again. Because reopening a case doesn't just disturb evidence. It disturbs people, memories, fear. And somewhere out there, the person who made that anonymous phone call was watching the investigation unfold. Waiting, because whoever made that call knew something no one else had said out loud yet. Something buried for 20 years. And now it was beginning to surface. Cold cases rarely break open with a single discovery. Instead, they loosen slowly, like old wood swelling and cracking after years of pressure. One overlooked detail leads to another. One quiet memory unlocks something someone once dismissed as unimportant. And once that process begins, the past starts rearranging itself. Detective Laura Bennett returned to the Carter file late that night. The sheriff's office was nearly empty. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above rows of quiet desks while the rain outside tapped against the windows in slow, steady rhythm. She spread the case documents across the table again. Photographs, witness statements, evidence logs, interview transcripts. 20 years of investigation frozen in paper. But now the timeline looked different. Because the moment Daniel Carter's truck appeared outside Emily's house at 6:30 a.m., the entire morning of July 14th shifted. Bennett began writing a new sequence on the whiteboard. 6 a.m., Emily wakes up. Coffee prepared. Kitchen lights on. 6:15 a.m., estimated last normal activity in the house. Coffee mug half full. No disturbance. 6:30 a.m., neighbor Walter Hayes sees a green pickup truck parked outside. Engine running. Truck stays approximately 10 minutes. 6:40 a.m., truck leaves. After that, nothing. No witnesses. No phone activity. No confirmed sightings of Emily Carter ever again. Bennett stared at the board. If Hayes was correct, and everything about the man suggested he was, then Daniel Carter had been outside his sister's house during the narrow window when she disappeared, which raised the question investigators should have asked 20 years ago. Why? She flipped open the financial records section of the case file. Rachel had mentioned Daniel owed money in 2001. Back then, detectives looked briefly into his debts, but found nothing concrete tying them to Emily's disappearance. But financial investigations in 2001 weren't what they were now. Digital records were limited. Informal loans, especially the kind arranged between acquaintances or underground lenders, rarely left clear paper trails. Bennett pulled up Daniel Carter's archived financial profile on her computer. Bank statements from that period were incomplete, but a few patterns stood out. Withdrawals, large ones, cash disappearing in uneven chunks over the months leading up to July 2001. $500, 1,000, 750, always cash, and always shortly after deposits from the garage where he worked. Then there was something else, a name that appeared twice in an early investigative note but had never been pursued. Victor Lang. Bennett leaned closer to the screen. Victor Lang wasn't family, not a co-worker, but his name appeared in a brief paragraph written by a detective in 2001. Possible loan source connected to Daniel Carter. Interview not conducted. The note ended there. No explanation. No follow-up. Bennett searched the county records database. Victor Lang still lived in Maple Ridge, and his background explained immediately why the original investigators may have hesitated. Lang had a reputation. Nothing officially violent, no major convictions, but a long list of complaints, disputes, and financial investigations stretching back decades. Illegal lending, high-interest loans, collections that occasionally turned aggressive. The kind of man people avoided confronting unless absolutely necessary. If Daniel Carter owed money to Victor Lang in 2001, that could explain the argument Emily had with him days before she vanished. But it didn't explain why Daniel would be outside Emily's house early that morning, unless Emily had threatened to interfere. Or worse, unless she had already done something. Bennett closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Sometimes solving a cold case means asking a brutal question. What if the victim wasn't the intended target? What if Emily Carter had stepped into a situation she wasn't supposed to be part of? The next morning, Bennett drove to the edge of town where Victor Lang lived. The property sat beyond the main residential streets, surrounded by open fields and rusting farm equipment scattered across the land. Lang's house looked older than the Carter place, dark wood siding, cracked windows, and a long gravel driveway lined with abandoned vehicles. A man like Lang preferred isolation. Bennett knocked on the door. It took nearly a full minute before footsteps approached from inside. Victor Lang opened the door slowly. He was 70 now, tall but slightly stooped, with deep lines carved into his face. His gray beard looked uneven, and his eyes held the sharp alertness of someone used to measuring people quickly. "You law enforcement?" he asked immediately. "Yes." Lang sighed. "What now?" "Detective Laura Bennett, County Cold Case Unit." His expression changed slightly. "Cold case?" "Yes." "Which one?" "Emily Carter." For a moment, the name seemed to drift across his face like an old memory surfacing through fog. 20 years ago, he muttered. "Yes." Lang stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." The interior of the house smelled like cigarette smoke and motor oil. A small television played quietly in the corner while stacks of paperwork covered the kitchen table. Lang sat down heavily in a chair. "I already talked to police back then," he said. Bennett sat across from him. "Actually, according to our records, you never did." Lang frowned. "That can't be right. There's a note mentioning your name, but no interview." Lang scratched his beard. "Well, maybe they meant to." Bennett watched him carefully. "Did you know Daniel Carter?" Lang snorted. Everybody in this town knew Daniel. "How so?" "He owed half the county money at one point." "Did he owe you?" Lang didn't answer immediately. Then he shrugged. "Yeah." "How much?" 3,000. The number was larger than Bennett expected. "When?" "Spring of 2001. "Did he pay it back?" Lang smiled faintly. "Not all of it." "How much was left by July?" "About 1,800. Bennett leaned forward. "Did you ever contact Emily Carter about that debt?" Lang's eyes narrowed. "Why would I?" "Because someone might have told her." Lang shook his head. "I deal with the person who owes me. Nobody else." "Did Daniel seem worried about the debt?" "He always seemed worried." "What about angry?" Lang gave a short laugh. "People who owe money are always angry." Bennett considered her next question carefully. "Did you ever threaten him?" Lang looked directly at her. "No, but I told him something he didn't like." "What was that?" "That if he didn't start paying, I'd come collect in other ways." The phrase lingered in the room. Bennett spoke slowly. "When was the last time you saw Daniel Carter in 2001? Lang thought for a moment. "Week before the girl disappeared." "What happened?" "He said he'd give me the money soon." "Did he?" "No." "Did you ever go to Emily Carter's house?" Lang shook his head firmly. "No reason to." "Did you see Daniel on the morning of July 14th? "No." Bennett studied him. Lang looked irritated but not nervous. A man used to police questions, used to walking close to legal lines without crossing them fully. But something still bothered her. "Victor," she said quietly, "if Daniel Carter owed you money and his sister threatened to expose something, what would happen?" Lang leaned back in his chair. "That depends. On what? How desperate Daniel was." The answer felt heavier than it sounded. Bennett stood up. "Thank you for your time." Lang nodded once. But as she reached the door, he said something else. "You're not the first person to ask about that girl." Bennett stopped. "What do you mean?" Lang shrugged. "A couple months ago, someone else came around asking the same questions." The words hit like a sudden gust of wind through a quiet room. "Who?" Bennett asked. Lang shook his head. "Didn't give a name. Man or woman?" "Woman." "Did she say why she was asking?" "No." Bennett felt the investigation shift again, because now there was another unknown piece in the story. Someone had been asking about Emily Carter recently. Someone who knew enough to question Daniel's death. Someone who might be connected to the anonymous call that reopened the case. Did she ask about anything specific? Bennett asked. Lang thought. Yeah. What? Lang's eyes moved toward the window. She asked about the truck. The room fell silent. What did you tell her? The truth. And what's that? Lang looked back at Bennett. That truck didn't just disappear after 2001. Bennett felt a slow chill run through her chest. What do you mean? Lang leaned forward slightly. I saw it again. When? Couple weeks after the girl vanished. Where? Lang's voice dropped. Out near Miller's Quarry. Miller's Quarry sat nearly 15 miles outside Maple Ridge. Abandoned, overgrown, and large enough that search teams in 2001 had never fully covered it. Bennett's mind raced, because if Daniel Carter's truck had been seen there, 2 weeks after Emily disappeared, then one terrifying possibility emerged. The truck had been used again, not for a visit, not for an argument, but for something far worse. And for 20 years, no one had ever searched Miller's Quarry. Miller's Quarry had been abandoned for nearly 30 years. The gravel road leading to it barely appeared on modern maps anymore, swallowed slowly by weeds and cracked asphalt. Rusted fencing sagged along the perimeter, and faded warning signs still clung to metal posts, their red lettering almost erased by time and weather. Detective Laura Bennett parked her car just before the road narrowed into dirt. For a long moment, she didn't step out. The engine ticked softly as it cooled while the quiet countryside stretched endlessly around her. Wind moved through tall grass fields, bending them in slow waves toward the tree line where the quarry lay hidden. If Victor Lang was telling the truth, Daniel Carter's truck had been seen here in late July of 2001, 2 weeks after Emily Carter disappeared. That timeline mattered, because by then the entire town had already been searching for her. Police had canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and sent search teams through woods surrounding Maple Ridge. But Miller's Quarry sat far outside those search grids. Too far, which meant if something had been brought here, no one would have been looking. Bennett stepped out of the car. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and old stone. She walked slowly down the dirt road until the quarry finally appeared through a break in the trees. The pit itself was enormous, a jagged wound in the earth carved decades earlier by industrial machinery. Layers of gray rock descended in steep terraces toward a dark pool of rainwater at the bottom. Abandoned equipment rusted along the edges, broken conveyors, collapsed scaffolding, the skeletal frame of an old crane frozen permanently in place. It was the kind of place people avoided. Too isolated, too quiet, and large enough to hide almost anything. Bennett stood at the edge for several minutes, imagining the scene as it might have looked 20 years ago. A dark green pickup truck rolling slowly down the gravel path. No witnesses, no nearby houses, just empty land stretching for miles. If someone wanted to dispose of something here, they could have taken their time. She turned back toward the car and grabbed her phone. Within an hour, the sheriff's department had assembled a small search team. Crime scene specialists, 2 cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar equipment. Cold cases rarely receive immediate resources, But the possibility of a previously unsearched disposal site changed things quickly. By mid-afternoon, the quiet quarry filled with movement. Yellow tape stretched along the entrance road while investigators walked slowly across the rocky terrain, mapping potential areas of interest. The dogs began their work first. Handlers guided them carefully across different sections of the quarry floor, while Bennett watched from the edge of the pit. The first hour passed quietly. Then the second. Wind picked up across the open rock, carrying dust through the air, while technicians prepared the radar equipment near the lower terraces. For a moment, Bennett wondered if Victor Lang had simply been mistaken. Memories distort over time. People recall fragments and attach meaning to them later. But then when the dogs stopped, the handler froze. The animal circled a patch of ground halfway down the quarry slope, an area where loose gravel had settled unevenly along the rock. The dog sniffed again, then sat down. Signal. Bennett felt the sudden tension ripple through the team. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect the scent of human decomposition even years later. One dog alert doesn't confirm anything, but it changes the tone of a search instantly. The handler moved the second dog toward the same spot. Within seconds, the second dog reacted the same way. Another alert. Now the air felt different. Technicians moved in carefully, marking the area with small orange flags while Bennett descended the slope slowly toward them. The ground looked ordinary. Loose gravel, thin weeds pushing through cracks in the soil. Nothing obvious. But the radar equipment told a different story. Within minutes, the screen began showing irregular patterns beneath the surface, disturbances in the natural rock layers roughly 6 feet down. Something had been buried there. Bennett watched as investigators exchanged quiet looks. After 2 decades, they might have finally found something. A backhoe arrived just before sunset. Excavation at potential burial sites moves slowly and carefully. Each layer of dirt must be removed methodically, documented, photographed. The first foot revealed nothing but compact gravel. Then the second. Then the third. At 4 feet, the soil color changed slightly, darker, softer. A sign the ground had once been disturbed. Bennett stood nearby with the rest of the team as the excavation continued. No one spoke much, because everyone understood the gravity of what they might be uncovering. Finally, nearly 5 feet down, the backhoe operator stopped. Something white had appeared beneath the dirt. One of the technicians climbed carefully into the trench with a brush. The moment stretched quietly as loose soil fell away from the object. Then the technician looked up. "Bone," he said. The word carried across the quarry like an echo. Human bone. The excavation halted immediately while forensic specialists moved in. Within the next hour, more remains appeared. Fragments of rib, sections of spine, pieces of a skull partially embedded in compacted earth. The burial had been shallow, crude. Whoever placed the body here had covered it quickly with gravel and dirt, assuming time and isolation would keep it hidden forever. For 20 years, they had been right. Until now. Night fell before the full recovery could be completed. Portable lights illuminated the quarry floor, while investigators worked carefully through the soil layer by layer. By midnight, it was clear the remains belonged to a single individual. But one critical detail still remained unknown. Was it Emily Carter? Bennett stood quietly near the edge of the excavation site, watching the process unfold. 20 years of mystery had suddenly condensed into a patch of disturbed earth beneath floodlights. But as significant as the discovery was, it raised another question. If Daniel Carter had buried his sister here, why? Debts alone rarely drive someone to murder a family member. Something else had happened that morning. Something serious enough to trigger violence. And somewhere inside the Carter family history, the answer was still waiting. The remains were transported to the county medical examiner's office early the next morning. Identification would require DNA comparison, dental records if available, possibly weeks of analysis. But the moment the news leaked, and it always leaks, Maple Ridge reacted exactly the way small towns do when old tragedies return. The phones at the sheriff's office began ringing before sunrise. Reporters calling. Residents asking questions. Rumors spreading quickly across local coffee shops and grocery stores. By noon, everyone in town was talking about the quarry, about bones found in the dirt, about Emily Carter, and about the one person investigators had questioned only days earlier, Daniel Carter. Bennett knew it wouldn't take long for the news to reach him, which meant the next move had to happen quickly, because suspects in long-dormant cases react unpredictably when the ground beneath them suddenly shifts. Some panic, some disappear, and some make desperate mistakes. That evening, Bennett drove past Ridgeway Auto Repair again. The garage lights were off, the parking lot empty, but Daniel Carter's new pickup truck was still parked outside his small rental house across town, which meant he hadn't run. Not yet. But as Bennett sat in the car watching the quiet house through the darkness, another thought slowly settled in her mind. Victor Lang said someone else had been asking questions about Emily Carter. A woman. Someone who knew about Daniel's death. Someone who asked about the truck. And if that woman also knew about Miller's quarry, then the anonymous phone call that reopened the investigation might not have been random at all. It might have been a warning, because whoever made that call knew something buried in the Carter family was finally about to surface. And now that a body had been found in the dirt, the secret Daniel Carter had carried for 20 years was beginning to collapse. But Bennett sensed something else as well. Something colder, because when old crimes are exposed, they rarely stay contained to one terrible moment in the past. Sometimes the truth reveals something worse. Sometimes the story of what happened that morning in 2001 is only the beginning. And somewhere in Maple Ridge, someone else already knew that. The moment human remains are found in a cold case, time begins moving differently. For 20 years, the investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance had lived in a slow, quiet limbo. Paper files, old interviews, theories that circled endlessly without landing anywhere solid. But a body changes everything. By the next morning, the county medical examiner's building had become the center of the investigation. Detective Laura Bennett stood outside the lab window, watching technicians move carefully around the examination table. The remains recovered from Miller's quarry had been cleaned just enough to begin preliminary analysis. Years underground had taken their toll. Bone fragments were scattered, some cracked by pressure from rock and soil. Clothing remnants clung in small, dark patches. Fabric that had once been part of something ordinary, something worn during an ordinary morning. Now was evidence. Dr. Helen Murray, the county's chief medical examiner, removed her gloves and stepped into the observation room. "You found quite a sight out there," she said. Bennett nodded. "Any idea yet?" Murray folded her arms thoughtfully. "It's early, but I can tell you a few things." Bennett waited. Female, based on pelvic structure. Her pulse quickened slightly. Approximate age? Late 20s, possibly early 30s. Emily Carter had been 26. Time in the ground? Murray glanced back through the glass. Long enough to match your timeline. 20 years. The pieces were aligning. Cause of death? Bennett asked. Murray shook her head. Too soon to say. There's trauma to the skull, but we need closer analysis before confirming anything. She paused. But there's something else. What? Murray handed Bennett a small evidence bag. Inside lay a corroded metal object partially embedded in soil residue. A ring. Gold. Simple design. Bennett stared at it. Where was it found? Near the ribcage. Wedding ring. Looks like it. Bennett's mind immediately returned to the Carter family. Emily Carter had never been married, which meant one possibility. The ring didn't belong to her, but someone had buried it with her, or lost it during the burial. Either way, it represented something investigators had never known about, and that meant someone else had been at Miller's quarry. Someone connected to the moment Emily Carter died. Across town, the news had already reached Daniel Carter. Bennett knew that because her phone rang just after noon. It was Officer Ramirez, stationed outside Daniel's rental house. "He's acting strange," Ramirez said. "Ow!" Packing things into his truck. Bennett's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. Suitcases. Looks like it. The drive across Maple Ridge took 8 minutes. By the time Bennett arrived, 2 patrol cars were already parked along the quiet residential street. Daniel Carter stood beside his truck in the driveway, a duffel bag resting on the open tailgate. He froze when he saw her step out of the car. For a moment, no one spoke. The afternoon air carried the distant sound of lawn mowers and children playing somewhere down the block. Ordinary life continuing just feet away from a man who might have buried his sister 20 years earlier. Bennett walked toward him slowly. "Going somewhere?" she asked. Daniel glanced at the bag. "Just a trip." "Where?" "Out of state." "For how long?" "Don't know yet." His voice sounded steady, but his hands told a different story. They kept flexing slightly at his sides. "Daniel," Bennett said quietly, "we found human remains at Miller's Quarry." The words hung between them. He didn't react immediately, but the silence that followed lasted too long. Finally, he looked down at the gravel driveway. "So," he said, "so the remains appeared to belong to a woman roughly Emily's age." Still silence. Bennett stepped closer. "Do you know anything about that?" Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then why are you packing your truck?" "I told you. Trip. Seems like strange timing." He shrugged. "Life goes on." Bennett studied him carefully. In 20 years of interviews and investigations, she had learned to watch the smallest shifts in a person's body language. Daniel Carter wasn't panicking, but something inside him had definitely changed. The calm confidence from the garage interview was gone. In its place sat something quieter. Resignation. "You can't leave the county right now," Bennett said. Daniel looked up. "You arresting me?" "Not yet." "Then you can't stop me." Legally, he was right. Without charges or a warrant, Daniel Carter remained a free man. But Bennett also knew something else. People who start packing bags right after investigators find a body usually have a reason. "Mind if we talk again?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. Inside, the house looked exactly the way it had 20 years earlier when detectives first searched it. Small living room, faded furniture, television mounted near the corner. Time had moved forward everywhere else in Maple Ridge. But Daniel Carter seemed to live inside a pocket where very little had changed. They sat at the kitchen table, the same place detectives had once questioned him about Emily's disappearance in 2001. Bennett placed the evidence bag containing the ring on the table. Daniel's eyes moved toward it, and for the first time since she met him, his composure cracked. Just slightly. "You recognize this?" she asked. Daniel stared at the ring. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered one word. "No." Bennett leaned forward. It was buried with the remains. Still silence. "You told me yesterday you never went to Miller's Quarry." "I didn't." "Then how did that ring get there?" Daniel rubbed his face slowly. "I don't know." Bennett studied him carefully. There are moments during interrogations when the truth almost surfaces, when a suspect stands on the edge of confession without realizing it. Daniel Carter looked exactly like someone standing on that edge. So Bennett asked the question directly. "Daniel, did Emily come to you that morning?" His eyes closed briefly, just long enough to confirm something inside him had shifted. Then he answered, "Yes." The word landed heavily in the quiet room. Bennett didn't interrupt. "What happened?" she asked softly. Daniel stared at the table. "She showed up at my place around 6. That contradicted his original timeline completely. "Why?" "She wanted to talk." "About what?" "My debts." "Victor Lang." "Yes." Bennett felt the pieces rearranging again. "What did she say?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "She said she had already called someone." "Who?" "The police." The statement changed everything, because now the argument days earlier made sense. Emily Carter had discovered something serious about her brother's dealings, serious enough to report. "What happened next?" Bennett asked. Daniel's voice dropped. "We argued." "Did she threaten you?" "She said I was dragging the family into something dangerous. And she wanted me to turn myself in." The room felt very still. "And did you?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No." Bennett waited. "What happened after the argument?" Daniel's hands trembled slightly. "We got into the truck." "Why?" "She wanted to go somewhere quiet to talk." "Where?" "Miller's Quarry." Bennett's pulse slowed. The story was finally reaching the moment everything changed. "You drove there together?" "Yes." And Emily was alive when you arrived? Daniel nodded. What happened at the quarry? For a moment, Daniel didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the table, as if replaying a memory he had buried for 2 decades. Then he whispered something barely audible. She wasn't supposed to die. The words hung in the air like smoke. Bennett didn't move. Tell me what happened, she said. Daniel's voice shook slightly now. We were arguing near the edge. She kept saying I had to go to the police. And I pushed her. The room fell silent. How hard? I didn't mean to. Daniel. He looked up finally. Tears had begun forming in his eyes. She hit her head on a rock. The truth, after 20 years, had finally begun to surface. But Bennett sensed immediately something about the story didn't fit, because one detail still remained unexplained. The ring. Emily Carter didn't wear a wedding ring, which meant someone else had been there. Someone Daniel Carter hadn't mentioned. And as Bennett stared at the trembling man across the table, one chilling thought surfaced in her mind. If Emily died accidentally during that argument, then who helped bury her body in Miller's quarry? Because one man alone would have had difficulty digging a grave in solid quarry rock, which meant Daniel Carter might not have been alone that morning. And whoever the second person was had stayed silent for 20 years. Daniel Carter sat frozen at the kitchen table. For 20 years, he had repeated the same simple lie. He never saw Emily that morning, never drove to her house, never left for work late for any reason other than traffic. Now the lie had cracked open. The confession sitting between them felt fragile, like glass that might shatter if Bennett pushed too hard, too fast. She hit her head, Daniel had said, but the story didn't end there. It couldn't, because bodies don't bury themselves, and wedding rings don't appear in shallow graves without explanation. Detective Laura Bennett leaned forward slightly. Daniel, after Emily fell, what did you do? His hands remained clasped tightly together. I checked if she was breathing. Was she? He shook his head. No. How long did you stay there? I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. Did you call anyone? No. Why not? Daniel's eyes flickered with something darker than fear. Because I knew what it would look like. He wasn't wrong. A man with gambling debts and illegal loans. A violent argument. A sister who had just threatened to contact the police. If Emily Carter died during that confrontation, the explanation might not have mattered. It would look like murder. What happened next? Bennett asked quietly. Daniel swallowed. I panicked. Did you try to move her? Yes. Where? Down the slope. He pointed vaguely toward the ground as if the quarry still existed beneath the house. I drag her a little. Then what? Daniel didn't answer. The silence stretched again. Daniel, Bennett said gently, you said she wasn't supposed to die, but someone buried her. His breathing slowed. Did you dig the grave? Another long pause. Then he whispered the answer. No. The word landed exactly where Bennett expected it to. Who helped you? Daniel's eyes closed again. For 20 years, he had carried this secret alone. Or at least that's what everyone believed. But secrets rarely stay contained to one person. Eventually they spread. And when they spread inside families, they become something even heavier. Daniel, Bennett said carefully, we found a ring buried with the remains. His eyes opened. For the first time, real fear appeared in them. You shouldn't have found that, he muttered. Why? He looked away. That wasn't supposed to be there. The answer confirmed everything Bennett suspected. The ring belonged to someone else. Someone present at the burial. Who else was at Miller's quarry that morning? She asked. Daniel stared at the wall. The clock above the refrigerator ticked quietly. Finally, he said name. Rachel. The word felt like a sudden drop in the room. Rachel Carter, Emily's sister. The woman Bennett had spoken to just 2 days earlier in the dental clinic break room. The woman who described Daniel as angry, troubled, desperate. The woman who said their mother had always suspected something. And now Daniel Carter was telling a completely different story. She came after, he said. After what? Bennett asked. After Emily died. Ow! I called her. Bennett felt the investigation shift again beneath her feet. You called Rachel from the quarry? Yes. Why? Because I didn't know what to do. What did you tell her? That Emily was hurt. Did you tell her Emily was dead? Daniel nodded slowly. She thought I killed her. Did you? No. But you pushed her. I didn't mean to. The line between accident and intent hung uneasily between them. What did Rachel say when you called? Bennett asked. Daniel rubbed his forehead. She told me to stay there. For how long? Until she got there. Bennett's mind replayed the timeline again. If Emily left Daniel's house around 6, if they drove to the quarry shortly after, Rachel might have arrived sometime between 7 and 8 that morning, exactly when the town was just beginning to wake up. Did Rachel drive her own car? Bennett asked. Yes. Did anyone see her leave? I don't know. What happened when she arrived? Daniel stared at the floor again. She saw Emily lying there. What did she do? She cried. His voice had grown quieter now. Then she said something I'll never forget. What did she say? Daniel swallowed. She said if this gets out, they'll destroy all of us. The sentence carried the quiet logic of desperation. Families sometimes close ranks in the face of disaster, protecting one member at the cost of another. What happened next? Bennett asked. We buried her. You and Rachel together? Yes. With what tools? Shovels in my truck. That explained the shallow grave. A rushed burial with whatever tools were available. But one detail still didn't fit. The ring, Bennett said. Daniel's expression darkened. That was Rachel's. Bennett felt the quiet weight of the answer settle in her chest. Rachel Carter, the grieving sister, the woman who sat calmly describing the past only days earlier. The same woman who might have helped bury her own sister's body. How did the ring end up in the grave? Bennett asked. Daniel shook his head. She didn't realize she lost it. While we were digging. Did she notice later? Yes. What did she say? She panicked. Why? Because it proved she was there. The entire story now carried a chilling clarity. 2 siblings standing inside an abandoned quarry 20 years ago. One sister lying dead on the ground. The other 2 deciding what to do next. Bennett asked the question that mattered most. Why didn't Rachel come forward later? Daniel laughed softly. A bitter sound. You think anyone would believe that story? He wasn't wrong. 2 siblings claiming a death was an accident after burying the body. Police and prosecutors might see something else entirely. Premeditated murder. Conspiracy. Rachel said we had to keep it buried, Daniel continued. For how long? Forever. But forever rarely exists in criminal investigations. Eventually someone talks. Eventually guilt surfaces. Eventually secrets leak into the open, which brought Bennett back to the anonymous phone call that reopened the case. Someone had tipped police to check the family. Someone who knew enough to point investigators directly toward Daniel. And possibly Rachel. Daniel, Bennett said slowly, did Rachel contact you recently? His head lifted. No. Did she seem nervous when we reopened the case? I haven't talked to her. Bennett studied his face carefully, then asked the question that had been circling her thoughts since Victor Lang mentioned the mysterious woman. Daniel, is Rachel the kind of person who could live with this for 20 years? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the window where late afternoon sunlight filtered across the kitchen floor. Finally, he whispered something almost to himself. She never slept well after that day. The words lingered, because people who carry secrets that heavy rarely escape them completely. They show up in sleepless nights, in nervous conversations, in small cracks that appear over time, and sometimes in anonymous phone calls made before sunrise. Bennett stood up slowly. Daniel, I'm placing you under arrest. He didn't resist, didn't argue. He simply nodded once, as if this moment had always been waiting somewhere in the distance. But as Officer Ramirez stepped forward to place handcuffs around Daniel's wrists, Bennett felt something unsettled in the back of her mind, because one question still refused to settle. If Rachel Carter helped bury Emily Carter 20 years ago, then why would she speak to Bennett so openly just days earlier? Why reveal so much about Daniel's troubles? Why bring attention back to the family at all? Unless something had changed, something Rachel hadn't said yet. Because secrets buried that deep don't stay quiet forever. Sometimes the people who helped hide them become the ones who finally expose them. And somewhere in Maple Ridge, Rachel Carter was about to learn that the past she buried at Miller's Quarry had finally been dug back up. The arrest of Daniel Carter spread across Maple Ridge faster than any official statement ever could. By nightfall, patrol cars had already come and gone from his quiet street. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, and the local news station had parked a van outside the sheriff's office. The town that once searched the woods for Emily Carter now whispered the same unsettling sentence in grocery store aisles and diner booths. Her own brother, Detective Laura Bennett, stood inside the observation room outside Interview Room 2, watching through the one-way glass as Daniel Carter sat alone at the metal table. 20 years earlier, he had walked into police interviews as a grieving brother. Now he sat there as the prime suspect in a homicide investigation. His shoulders slumped slightly, hands cuffed loosely in front of him. But Bennett knew something about confessions. They're rarely complete the first time. People reveal just enough to relieve pressure, just enough to shift blame away from themselves, just enough to survive the moment. Daniel Carter had admitted pushing Emily. He had admitted burying her. But the story still carried rough edges. And one person in particular remained missing from the room. Rachel Carter. Across town, another patrol car had already arrived at the dental clinic. Officer Ramirez had given the update only minutes earlier over the radio. "She's here," he said. "Does she know why we're coming?" Bennett asked. "No. Bring her in." The drive back to the station took less than 10 minutes. When Rachel Carter walked into the interrogation room, she looked confused more than afraid. Her coat hung loosely over her shoulders, and strands of brown hair had slipped free from the ponytail she wore earlier that day. She glanced at Bennett sitting across from her. "Is this about Daniel?" she asked immediately. Bennett didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed the evidence bag containing the ring on the table between them. Rachel's eyes dropped to it. For a split second, her breathing stopped. And that was enough. "You recognize it," Bennett said quietly. Rachel looked up. "No." The lie came too fast. That ring was recovered from a burial site at Miller's Quarry. Rachel's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "We believe the remains belong to Emily Carter." The room fell silent. For years, Rachel Carter had imagined that possibility. Every missing person family does. But imagining something and hearing it confirmed are very different experiences. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. "You found her," she whispered. "We found someone buried where Daniel said she died." Rachel covered her mouth. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then Bennett spoke again. "Daniel told us what happened." Rachel's eyes snapped upward. "What do you mean?" "He told us about the argument." Silence. "He told us about the drive to Miller's Quarry." Rachel's breathing grew uneven. "And he told us you were there." The word struck like a physical blow. Rachel stared at Bennett as if the room had suddenly tilted beneath her. "He said I was there." "Yes." "That's not true." Bennett slid the evidence bag closer. "That ring belongs to you." Rachel's face drained of color. It was buried with the body. Still silence. "Daniel said you lost it while helping him dig the grave." Rachel's hands began trembling. But something unexpected happened next. She didn't deny it again. Instead, she whispered something else. "He promised he'd never say that." Bennett felt the quiet confirmation settle in the air. "Rachel, you were at the quarry that morning." Rachel's eyes closed slowly. 20 years of silence pressed against her from every direction. "I didn't kill her," she said. "I didn't say you did." "He did." "That's not what Daniel said." Rachel laughed softly, a hollow, exhausted sound. "Of course he didn't." Bennett leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." Rachel looked down at the ring. Memories long buried began forcing their way back into the room. "He called me around 7, she said quietly. "What did he say?" "That Emily was hurt." "Did he say how?" "No." "Why did you go to the quarry?" "Because he sounded terrified." Her voice shook slightly. "I thought maybe she broke a leg or something." "What did you see when you arrived?" Rachel swallowed. Emily was lying on the ground. "Was she alive?" "No." The word echoed softly against the concrete walls. What did Daniel say happened? Bennett asked. Rachel's eyes opened. He said she slipped. Bennett waited. Did you believe him? Rachel shook her head slowly. No. Why not? Because Emily was careful. The room grew very still. Rachel continued. And because Daniel had blood on his hands. The story Daniel told earlier suddenly looked less certain. Rachel, Bennett said carefully, Daniel claims he pushed Emily during an argument. Rachel stared directly at her now. He did more than push her. The statement hung in the air. What do you mean? Rachel's voice dropped. They were screaming at each other when I arrived. Bennett frowned. You told me earlier Daniel called you after she was already dead. He lied. The room shifted again. When I got there, Emily was still standing, Rachel said. What? They were near the edge of the quarry arguing. The timeline Daniel had described collapsed instantly. What were they arguing about? Bennett asked. Money and the police. What about the police? Emily had already reported Daniel's debts. To who? To the county investigators looking into Victor Lang's lending. That detail had never appeared in the original case. And Daniel knew? Bennett asked. Yes. What happened next? Rachel's hands shook slightly as the memory surfaced. Emily told him it was the only way to protect the family. And Daniel grabbed her. Grabbed her how? By the shoulders. Rachel's breathing grew uneven again. I was still walking toward them when it happened. What happened? Rachel's voice barely rose above a whisper. He slammed her against the rock. The room fell silent. She hit her head. Rachel continued. Hard. And then she collapsed. Bennett felt a cold weight settle in her chest. This was no accidental shove. This sounded deliberate. What did Daniel do? She asked. He just stood there. For how long? I don't know, maybe a minute. Did you check if Emily was alive? Yes. And she wasn't breathing. The same ending, but a very different path leading to it. What happened next? Bennett asked. Rachel stared at the ring again. Daniel said everything was ruined. Did he suggest burying her? Yes. Did you agree? Rachel's eyes filled with tears again. I didn't know what to do. Why didn't you call the police? Because Daniel said they'd think we planned it. The same fear Daniel described earlier. But Rachel's voice carried something else too. Regret. I should have called, she whispered. Bennett didn't respond immediately. Because another question had been waiting since the moment Victor Lang mentioned the mysterious woman. Rachel, Bennett said softly, did you contact Victor Lang recently? Rachel looked up slowly. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Why? Because I couldn't carry it anymore. The truth finally surfaced. You were the anonymous caller, Bennett said. Rachel nodded. I told you to check the family. Why now? Rachel stared at the table. Because my mother died thinking Emily was still out there somewhere. Her voice cracked slightly. She spent years waiting for her to come home. The weight of that memory seemed unbearable. I couldn't let her be buried as a missing person forever, Rachel said. So you decided to tell us. Yes. Why didn't you confess immediately? Rachel gave a faint, tired smile. I knew you'd start asking questions. And I knew eventually you'd find a quarry. Bennett sat quietly for a moment. 20 years of silence had ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with a sister who simply couldn't live with a lie anymore. Rachel Carter wiped her eyes slowly. I helped bury her, she said. I know that. I should have told the truth. Yes. Rachel looked toward the door. Is Daniel saying it was an accident? Yes. She shook her head. It wasn't. The statement hung in the room like a final piece sliding into place. Because now the investigation faced one last critical question. Two siblings had witnessed the same moment. One called it a tragic accident. The other called it violence. And buried beneath 20 years of silence, the truth about what really happened at Miller's Quarry still remained just out of reach. The interrogation rooms at the Maple Ridge Sheriff's Office sat directly across from each other. Two doors, two metal tables, two siblings separated by a hallway and 20 years of silence. Inside one room sat Daniel Carter. Inside the other sat Rachel Carter. For the first time since the morning of July 14th, 2001, Both of them were telling investigators what happened at Miller's Quarry, but their stories did not match. Detective Laura Bennett stood in the observation corridor between the rooms, looking through the glass at Daniel again. He sat exactly where she had left him earlier, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the tabletop. He had confessed to pushing Emily, to panicking, to burying her body. But Rachel's version told something darker, something deliberate, a violent shove, a head slammed against stone, murder. Bennett knew which version prosecutors would believe more easily. But investigators don't choose stories. They test them, piece by piece. She stepped back into Daniel's interrogation room. He looked up slowly when the door opened. "Rachel told you something different," he said immediately. It wasn't a question. Bennett sat down across from him. "She said Emily was still alive when she arrived." Daniel shook his head. "That's not true. She said you grabbed Emily and slammed her against the rock." His jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me again." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We were arguing near the edge." "About the police?" "Yes." "About Victor Lang?" "Yes." "What did Emily say?" "That she had already talked to investigators." "And that made you angry?" "Of course it did." "Did you grab her?" "I tried to stop her from walking away." "Ow!" "By the arm." "And then?" "She pulled away." "Did you push her?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." "How hard?" "I don't know." "Did you slam her into a rock?" "No." "Then how did she hit her head?" "She slipped." The same explanation, delivered carefully. But Bennett had heard thousands of interviews like this. And people who describe accidents usually show confusion. Daniel Carter didn't sound confused. He sounded precise, controlled, as if he had replayed this version many times before. "Daniel," Bennett said quietly, "Rachel says she watched you push Emily into the rock wall." He shook his head again. "She's lying?" "Why would she lie?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the wall for several seconds. Then he said something unexpected. "Because she was already angry at me." "For what?" "For getting Emily involved." "Involved in what?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "The debt." Bennett waited. "Emily was helping me pay it off," he continued. "What?" "She had been giving me money for months." That detail had never appeared anywhere in the case file. "How much?" "Couple hundred here and there." "Did Rachel know?" "No." "Did Emily want to keep it secret?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she thought our parents would panic." The story added a new layer to the conflict. Emily wasn't just confronting Daniel about his debts. She had been trying to fix them. Quietly. Family often does that. Helping behind the scenes. Trying to keep problems from spreading. Then why did she contact the police? Bennett asked. Daniel's voice grew quieter. Because she found out something worse. What? Victor Lang wasn't the only person I owed. The room went still. Who else? Bennett asked. Daniel hesitated. Then he whispered the name. Mark Halvorson. Bennett's mind raced. The name appeared faintly familiar. She had seen it somewhere inside the old investigative documents. Who is Mark Halvorson? She asked. Used to run collections for Lang. Illegal collections? Daniel nodded. He threatened Emily. When? 2 days before she died. The revelation changed the entire dynamic of the case again. Explain, Bennett said. Daniel rubbed his temples. I missed a payment. And Halvorson came to Emily's house looking for me. Bennett's pulse quickened. Why Emily's house? He knew we were family. What happened? Emily told him to leave. Did he? No. What did he say? Daniel's voice dropped. He said if the money didn't show up soon, someone in the family would get hurt. The memory hung heavily in the room. Did Emily report that threat? Bennett asked. Yes. To who? To the county fraud investigators already looking into Lang. Now the earlier timeline made perfect sense. Emily wasn't simply interfering. She was protecting the family from dangerous lenders. And Daniel, Bennett continued slowly. When you argued with Emily at the quarry, was Halvorson part of that argument? Daniel nodded. She wanted me to testify against them. And you refused? Yes. Why? Because those men don't forgive. The room fell silent. Now Bennett understood something crucial. Emily Carter had been trying to expose a criminal lending operation. Daniel Carter had been trapped inside it. And their argument at the quarry might not have been about money at all. It might have been about fear. Daniel, Bennett said. When Rachel arrived, did she see the argument? No. She says she did. She's wrong. Then why would you say you slammed Emily into the rock? Daniel looked down at his hands. Because she came running when she heard the shouting. And she only saw the end. What end? Daniel swallowed. The moment Emily fell. For a moment, Bennett said nothing. 2 witnesses. 2 interpretations. 1 violent second that had destroyed an entire family. She left Daniel alone again and walked back into Rachel's room. Rachel Carter sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. Her eyes looked exhausted now. Daniel says you arrived after Emily fell, Bennett said. Rachel shook her head immediately. No. He says you only saw the last moment. That's not true. What did you see? Rachel leaned forward. I saw him shove her. Where exactly? Against the rock wall. Did he grab her first? Yes. With both hands. Did Emily push back? No. Are you sure? Yes. Bennett watched her carefully. Rachel Daniel says Emily had been helping him pay his debts. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. She never told me that. Did you know she reported a threat from Mark Halvorsen? Rachel nodded. Yes. So Emily believed the situation was dangerous. Yes. Then why go to the quarry alone with Daniel? Rachel hesitated. Because she still trusted him. That simple sentence carried the tragedy of the entire case. Emily Carter trusted her brother. Even after everything. Rachel, Bennett said quietly, why did you finally make the anonymous call? Rachel stared at the table again. Because Daniel started talking about moving away. When? Last month. Why did that matter? Because if he left, the truth would leave with him. Bennett nodded slowly. For 20 years, Rachel Carter had lived beside a secret buried under quarry gravel. But when Daniel began preparing to leave Maple Ridge, the fear of losing the truth forever had finally broken her silence. Rachel, Bennett said softly, did Daniel mean to kill Emily? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, the answer came quietly. I think he was angrier than he realized. Not a clear accusation, not a defense, just the uneasy middle ground where many family tragedies live. Bennett left the room and returned to the hallway between the interrogation rooms. 2 siblings, 2 versions of the same moment. And somewhere inside that moment lay the final truth about what happened at Miller's Quarry. But the investigation was no longer about finding Emily Carter. That part was over. Now it was about something else. About whether her death had been a terrible accident or a violent act buried under 20 years of silence. And somewhere in the quiet town of Maple Ridge, the consequences of that answer were about to reach the surface. The rain began falling over Maple Ridge just after midnight. Soft at first, then steady. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement outside the sheriff's office, while inside, the last pieces of a 20-year mystery slowly settled into place. Detective Laura Bennett stood alone in the hallway between the interrogation rooms. 2 doors. Behind one sat Daniel Carter. Behind the other sat Rachel Carter. 20 years earlier, they had stood together in an abandoned quarry, digging a shallow grave into gravel and stone. 2 siblings bound by panic, fear, and a secret they believed would never surface. But secrets don't disappear. They just wait. Wait for a phone call. Wait for a loose thread. Wait for someone who can't carry the silence anymore. Now that silence was finally gone, the forensic report arrived just before 1 a.m. Dr. Helen Murray walked into Bennett's office holding a thin folder. The preliminary findings from the examination of the remains recovered from Miller's Quarry. She placed the report on the desk. We have confirmation, she said. Bennett opened the folder slowly. Dental records. DNA comparison. The result was definitive. The remains found in the quarry belonged to Emily Carter. After 20 years of uncertainty, the missing woman from Maple Ridge had finally been found. But the report contained something else. A detail that would decide the final question of the investigation. Bennett flipped to the autopsy summary. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. But the description beneath it mattered even more. A fracture along the left side of the cranium. The pattern of impact suggested a single powerful collision against a hard surface. Not repeated blows. Not multiple injuries. One moment. One impact. One fatal strike. Dr. Murray folded her arms. The injury is consistent with someone being pushed or thrown into a rock wall. Bennett looked up. Could it happen from slipping? Murray considered the question carefully. In theory, yes. The answer hung in the room. In theory, Murray repeated. But the force would have to be significant. Bennett stared back at the report. Two versions of the same moment. Daniel Carter's version. An argument, a shove, an accidental fall. Rachel Carter's version. Anger, violence, a deliberate slam against the rock. The physical evidence could support either one. And after 20 years, that thin line between accident and intent might never be proven beyond doubt. Bennett closed the folder slowly. Outside the office window, rain continued falling over Maple Ridge, a quiet town that had spent 2 decades wondering what happened to one of its own. Now the answer had finally surfaced. But like many answers in real investigations, it came wrapped in uncertainty. By morning, both Daniel and Rachel Carter were formally charged. Daniel Carter faced the most serious accusations: manslaughter, unlawful disposal of a body, and obstruction of justice. Rachel Carter faced lesser charges: accessory after the fact and concealment of a death. Neither resisted when deputies led them out of the station. The story spread through Maple Ridge before sunrise. News vans returned. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Neighbors who had once joined search parties stood silently along the sidewalks as the Carter siblings were escorted inside. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others simply looked down at the ground. Because the truth about Emily Carter's death wasn't just about crime. It was about family, about trust, about the moment anger becomes irreversible. In the weeks that followed, investigators reconstructed the final morning of July 14th, 2001 as clearly as possible. Emily Carter woke early that day. She planned breakfast with Rachel. She planned to go to work at the library. She planned to celebrate her father's birthday later that evening. Instead, she drove to see her brother. She believed she could convince him to do the right thing, to cooperate with investigators, to escape the dangerous debt that had trapped him with men like Victor Lang and Mark Halvorsen. She believed family could still fix the situation. What happened next lasted only seconds. An argument, a shove, a terrible collision against the rock wall of an abandoned quarry. And just like that, Emily Carter's life ended. The rest of the morning unfolded in fear. Daniel calling Rachel. Rachel arriving at the quarry. The two of them staring at the body of their sister and making the worst decision of their lives. They buried her, covered the grave with gravel and dirt, then drove back to town and pretended the day had unfolded normally. By afternoon, the missing person reports began. Search parties filled the woods. Helicopters circled overhead. And for 20 years, the people of Maple Ridge asked the same question. Where did Emily Carter go? The answer had been sitting inside her own family the entire time. But secrets change people. Daniel Carter carried his in silence. Rachel Carter carried hers in guilt. And every year, the weight grew heavier. Until finally, Rachel made the call. 3 simple words. Check the family. That anonymous message reopened the investigation that would finally uncover the truth buried at Miller's Quarry. The Carter case would never be a perfectly clean story. There would always be debate. Some people in Maple Ridge believed Daniel's version, a tragic accident between siblings. Others believed Rachel's, a moment of anger that turned deadly. But everyone agreed on one thing. Emily Carter never deserved the ending she received. On a quiet hill outside town, a small headstone now stands where her remains were finally laid to rest. The inscription is simple. Just her name, her birth year, and the year she disappeared. Visitors still come sometimes. Old neighbors, former co-workers from the library, people who once walked through fields searching for clues that never appeared. And sometimes they stand there quietly remembering the girl who vanished on an ordinary summer morning in 2001. The girl whose story turned into a cold case that haunted a town for for 2 decades. Until one secret phone call broke the silence. Until the truth buried in a forgotten quarry finally surfaced. And even now, when the wind moves through the maple trees outside town, people in Maple Ridge still remember the lesson that came from the Carter family tragedy. Because sometimes the most dangerous mysteries aren't hidden by strangers. They live quietly inside families, waiting, buried beneath years of silence, until someone finally decides the truth matters more than the secret. Long after the headlines faded, Maple Ridge remained restless. Cold cases rarely end when arrests are made. They linger in courtrooms, in transcripts, in quiet conversations between neighbors who once believed they knew exactly what kind of town they lived in. For nearly 2 decades, the disappearance of Emily Carter had been a mystery. Now, it had become something else. A tragedy with witnesses. A family secret that had finally collapsed under its own weight. But the story did not stop with the arrests. Because the truth, once uncovered, has a way of spreading into places no one expected. The Carter case moved quickly into the court system that fall. Daniel Carter sat at the defense table during the first hearing, wearing the same expression he had carried since the night of his arrest. Calm, controlled, almost distant. Across the aisle sat Rachel Carter. They didn't look at each other. Not once. 20 years earlier, they had stood shoulder to shoulder beside a shallow grave in Miller's Quarry. Now they faced each other across a courtroom. 2 people bound by the same moment in time and by 2 different versions of it. The prosecution's case focused on a single question. What exactly happened during those final seconds between Daniel and Emily? Because legally, everything depended on that answer. If Daniel had intentionally slammed his sister against the rock wall, the crime was murder. If he had shoved her in anger without intending serious harm, it could be manslaughter. If she slipped while pulling away, it might even be considered a tragic accident, followed by a crime of panic when the body was hidden. The difference between those possibilities was measured in 1 violent second. And after 20 years, that second had no surviving witnesses beyond the 2 people sitting in the courtroom. Detective Laura Bennett attended the hearings quietly from the back row. She had seen enough cases to understand how unpredictable the final chapter could become. Evidence speaks, but memory changes. During the preliminary proceedings, prosecutors introduced the forensic report from Miller's Quarry. The medical examiner explained the skull fracture in careful detail. A single high-impact blow to the left side of Emily Carter's head. The pattern suggested she struck a hard rock surface with considerable force. Defense attorneys seized on one phrase in the report. Could be consistent with a fall. Prosecutors countered with another. Could be consistent with being pushed. The courtroom hung between those 2 interpretations. Then Rachel Carter took the stand. The room fell completely silent as she walked to the witness chair. She looked older than her 47 years now. Years of carrying a secret had etched themselves into her posture, into the careful way she held her hands together as she swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor began gently. "Rachel, why did you make the anonymous call that reopened this case?" Rachel's voice trembled slightly. "Because my sister deserved to be found, and you knew where she was buried." "Yes." "Why did you stay silent for 20 years?" Rachel paused before answering. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of Daniel?" "Yes. And afraid of what the truth would do to our family." The prosecutor nodded. "Tell the court what you saw at Miller's Quarry." Rachel closed her eyes briefly. When she spoke again, the words came slowly but clearly. "I saw Daniel shove Emily into the rock wall." The sentence echoed across the courtroom. No hesitation. No uncertainty. On the other side of the room, Daniel Carter lowered his head slightly, but said nothing. The defense attorney stood a moment later. "Rachel," he said calmly, "you waited 20 years to report this." "Yes." "And during those 20 years, you helped conceal the body." "Yes." "So today, the jury is expected to believe your memory of a few seconds from 2 decades ago." Rachel met his gaze. "Yes." "Isn't it possible you misunderstood what you saw?" "No." "Isn't it possible Emily slipped while trying to pull away?" Rachel's answer came immediately. "No." The defense attorney walked slowly across the floor. You were angry with your brother, weren't you? Rachel didn't respond. You blamed him for Emily's death. Yes. And you blamed him for the secret you had to carry. Another pause. Yes. So when you finally decided to come forward, you had every reason to make Daniel look as guilty as possible. The courtroom waited. Rachel's hands tightened slightly around the edge of the witness stand. Then she said something no one expected. I don't need to make him look guilty. The room fell silent. Because I watched it happen. Across the aisle, Daniel Carter finally lifted his eyes. For the first time since the trial began, he looked directly at his sister. There was no anger in his expression, only something quieter, something closer to exhaustion. The trial continued for weeks. Experts testified. Investigators reconstructed the timeline of July 14, 2001. Witnesses described the arguments between Daniel and Emily in the days before she disappeared. Victor Lang testified about the death. Even the abandoned quarry became part of the courtroom discussion, with photographs of the rocky ledge where Emily Carter had died projected onto a screen. But the most powerful moment came near the end, when Daniel Carter finally took the stand. For 20 years, he had protected his version of the story. Now he faced the jury. The prosecutor asked the question directly. Did you intentionally kill your sister? Daniel looked down at his hands. No. Did you push her? Yes. Were you angry? Yes. Did you mean to cause serious harm? No. The prosecutor stepped closer. Then why bury her body instead of calling for help? Daniel's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because I knew no one would believe me. The courtroom remained quiet as the truth settled into the air. And in many ways, that sentence captured the entire tragedy of the Carter family. A moment of anger, a fatal mistake, and a decision made in panic that destroyed every chance of explaining what really happened. Weeks later, the jury delivered its verdict. Daniel Carter was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and unlawful concealment of a body. Rachel Carter was convicted of accessory after the fact. Neither sentence could restore the life that ended at Miller's Quarry. But for the first time in 20 years, Emily Carter's story finally had an ending. Not a perfect one, not a completely certain one, but an ending built from truth instead of silence. Even now, years later, the people of Maple Ridge still talk about the Carter case sometimes. About how a missing person mystery turned into a family tragedy. About how the answer had been there all along, buried under layers of fear and loyalty. And about the anonymous phone call that changed everything. Because without that call, Emily Carter might still be listed as missing. Her grave still hidden beneath quarry gravel. Her story unfinished. Instead, her name became something else. A reminder whispered whenever another case goes cold. A reminder that sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. Waiting for the moment when someone finally decides they can't carry the secret anymore. When the Carter trial ended, Maple Ridge tried to return to normal. But towns like Maple Ridge never truly forget stories like that. Long after the courtroom emptied, long after the reporters packed their cameras and drove back toward the highway, the quiet streets still carried the echoes of what had happened. People passed the Carter house a little slower. They drove past the road leading to Miller's Quarry with the same uneasy curiosity that once surrounded the woods during the search for Emily. Cold cases don't just close. They settle into a place, into memory, into the identity of a community. And the Carter case left something behind that no verdict could fully resolve. Because even with the confession, the forensic evidence, and Rachel's testimony, one small question still hovered quietly in the background. What exactly happened during those final seconds of the quarry? The jury believed Daniel Carter had pushed his sister in anger, but no one could truly reconstruct the precise moment of impact. No camera, no independent witness. Just two siblings standing in the same place 20 years ago, remembering the same event in two different ways. That uncertainty lingered. But for Detective Laura Bennett, the case was finally finished. At least officially. The files were closed, evidence logged and archived. The long investigation that began with a 3-word phone call had reached its final chapter. Or so it seemed. Nearly 6 months after the trial ended, Bennett received another call. Not anonymous this time. A man introduced himself as Thomas Halvorsen. The name immediately caught her attention. Halvorsen, the same last name connected to Mark Halvorsen, the debt collector Daniel Carter had mentioned during his interrogation. The man spoke quietly. "My brother died last week," he said. Bennett listened carefully. "And I found something in his things." "What kind of thing?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the man said something that pulled the past back into the present. "A photograph." Bennett drove out to the Halvorsen property that afternoon. The house sat nearly 30 miles outside Maple Ridge, surrounded by dense farmland and narrow county roads that rarely saw traffic. Thomas Halvorsen greeted her on the porch. He looked nothing like the description of his brother Mark. Where Mark had reportedly been aggressive and volatile, Thomas appeared quiet and reserved, with the cautious manner of someone who had lived a life avoiding trouble. Inside the house, he placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. This was at Mark's desk. Bennett opened it. Inside was a photograph. Old, slightly faded, but unmistakable. It showed Miller's Quarry, and standing near the edge of the rock wall were 2 figures, Emily Carter and Daniel Carter. Bennett's pulse slowed. The photograph had clearly been taken from a distance, perhaps from the trees above the quarry slope. A long lens. Someone watching from afar. "Where did Mark get this?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "I don't know. When do you think it was taken?" "Based on the film, probably around 2001. Bennett studied the image again. Emily stood facing Daniel. Their body language looked tense. Even frozen in a single frame, the argument between them was obvious. But something else caught her attention. In the background of the photo, just barely visible along the gravel road leading into the quarry, sat a third vehicle, a dark sedan, not Daniel's truck. "Did your brother ever mention the Carter case?" Bennett asked. Thomas hesitated. "Only once." "What did he say?" "That some people should be careful about who they try to expose." The sentence carried a quiet threat, even years later. "Did he ever say he went to the quarry?" Bennett asked. Thomas shook his head. "No, but he kept that photograph." "Yes." Bennett slid the photo back into the envelope slowly, because the image suggested something unsettling. If Mark Halvorsen had been at Miller's Quarry that morning, then Daniel and Rachel Carter might not have been the only witnesses to Emily's death. Someone else could have been watching. Someone with a camera. Someone connected to the dangerous loan operation Emily had reported. The implications were disturbing, but the timing made prosecution impossible. Mark Halvorsen was dead, and even if he had witnessed the confrontation, the photograph proved only one thing. Daniel and Emily were at the quarry together, something the court had already established. Still, the image left an uncomfortable possibility behind. Maybe the truth about Emily Carter's death had always been larger than the Carter family. Maybe the people Daniel feared, the men connected to the illegal lending operation, had been closer to that final moment than anyone realized. Bennett returned to Maple Ridge with the photograph secured in an evidence folder. Technically, the case remained closed. Daniel Carter was serving his sentence. Rachel Carter had completed her shorter term and quietly left town after the trial. But the image from the quarry changed the way Bennett thought about the story. Because if someone else had been present that morning, watching, photographing, waiting, then the moment Emily Carter died might not have been as private as everyone believed. And perhaps the anonymous call that reopened the case 20 years later wasn't only about guilt. Perhaps someone else, somewhere, had also decided it was finally safe for the truth to surface, even if they never revealed themselves. The photograph now sits inside the Carter case file in the county archive. A final, unresolved artifact. A silent witness captured in faded film. Visitors rarely ask to see it. But investigators who study old cold cases sometimes pause at that image longer than expected, because it reminds them of something unsettling, even when a mystery appears solved. The full story may still be standing just outside the frame, watching quietly from the distance, waiting for someone to notice it was there all along.